Kristi Noem walked into a Senate hearing room today and walked out with far more problems than she brought in. Senators from both parties pressed her relentlessly. Suspicious spending, deaths of American citizens, agents operating without accountability, and she could barely answer. Stay until the end, because what happened in that room is more serious than any headline can capture. If you value real political journalism, hit like and subscribe. Today, March 3rd, 2026, Kristi Noem sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee for an oversight hearing on the Department of Homeland Security, and it was immediately clear this would not be a routine session. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois and minority leader on the committee, opened his remarks by noting that this hearing was, in his words, long overdue. After months of delays, evasions, and refusals by the secretary to appear before Congress. That alone says a great deal about the state of the Department of Homeland Security. A secretary who oversees one of the most powerful agencies in the United States, with authority over borders, deportations, and national security, spending months dodging legislative scrutiny. That is not the posture of a confident administration. That is the posture of an administration that knows its answers won't satisfy anyone. Noem opened with a statement enumerating outcomes of immigration policy, drops in border crossings, deportation numbers, arrests of alleged gang members and terrorists. But the senators in that room were not there for carefully curated statistics. They were there because of deaths. Two specific deaths, Renee Good and Alex Pretty, two American citizens killed by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis in January 2026. Those two cases transformed the debate over immigration into a debate about something far more fundamental: the power of the state to kill its own citizens in the name of an enforcement operation. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, when it is important to note a Republican, was blunt and direct. He characterized Noem's record at the helm of DHS as a disaster, and he didn't stop there. Tillis announced he would block administration nominations and bring Senate business to a halt until Noem answers questions that have been systematically ignored. When a senator from a cabinet secretary's own party uses the word disaster in a public hearing, we are no longer talking about political opposition. We are talking about institutional failure. Noem's problem is not simply that Democrats want her out of office. Her problem is that she is losing support where she needs it most. Among moderate Republicans, among senators facing re-election in competitive states, among figures who still believe there is a line separating law enforcement from arbitrary conduct. And that line, under her leadership, has been erased with a frequency that can no longer be ignored. Senator John Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, another natural ally of the administration, pressed Noem on the $220 million taxpayer-funded advertising campaign featuring the secretary herself in ads warning migrants about deportation. Kennedy raised the obvious question every taxpayer should be asking: is this public policy or is it personal promotion? And worse, the contracts for that campaign were allegedly directed to firms with ties to associates from Noem's previous campaigns in South Dakota. Noem denied direct involvement in selecting the contractors, but the denial in this context sounds like the beginning of a problem, not the end of one. What became most apparent in today's hearing was the full scope of the damage caused by the management of ICE and the Department of Homeland Security under Noem's leadership. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, did something rarely seen in a congressional hearing. He asked three people in the room to stand up, and he introduced them. Javier Ramirez, an American citizen detained for several days even after presenting his passport. Leonardo Garcia Venegas, another American citizen arrested in an ICE operation, who filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of those operations. And Mary Mar Martinez, an American citizen from Chicago, shot 5 times by a Border Patrol agent last October, and whose shooter, according to reports, boasted about the incident on social media before being placed on administrative leave. These are not abstract cases. They are not statistics. They are people with names, with faces, who were present in that room. And Noem's response was the standard the department has adopted as its official line. There are moments in enforcement operations where American citizens are affected. That formulation deserves careful examination because it reveals a great deal. It acknowledges no error. It acknowledges no violation. It frames what happened as an acceptable operational cost. And that, from a constitutional standpoint, is deeply troubling. In 2025, ICE detained more than 170 American citizens. 170. 5 people were killed in confrontations with federal agents. 32 individuals died in ICE custody. These are not minor collateral consequences of an aggressive policy. They are indicators of an agency operating with a level of discretion that cannot withstand the rule of law. And the person responsible for that agency appeared before the Senate today and essentially stated that everything falls within normal operational parameters. Senator Chris Coons's question about whether ICE or Border Patrol agents could be deployed to polling locations also deserves attention. Noem responded that there are no plans for that. But the mere fact that the question had to be asked, and had to be asked publicly in a formal congressional hearing, reveals the degree of distrust that has taken hold regarding this administration. When citizens and lawmakers must formally ask whether federal agents will be present at voting booths, something has already broken in the relationship between government and the governed. Senator Durbin raised cases of DACA recipients being deported, people who passed criminal background checks, who have established lives in the United States, who in some cases have lived in this country for decades. One of the cases he cited involves a father arrested and deported while his daughter was dying of cancer. Noem responded that the department simply enforces existing law and that changes are up to Congress. That is technically correct as a legal argument, but it is insufficient as a moral response. A cabinet secretary has the prerogative of prosecutorial discretion. Choosing to use it or refusing to is also a policy choice, and one with real consequences for real families. Today's hearing was also marked by tension surrounding Noem's statements following the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Pretty in Minneapolis. She called them domestic terrorists immediately after the incidents, before any investigation had been completed. Video footage that subsequently became public contradicted the narrative she had presented, and the victims' families publicly stated that the classification was outrageous. Today, before the senators, Noem walked it back slightly, saying she had been relaying preliminary information received from the field. But the damage was already done, and the question that remains is this: shouldn't a secretary with access to the best intelligence infrastructure in the country wait for facts before labeling dead American citizens as terrorists? There is a structural question running through everything we saw in this hearing that needs to be stated plainly. What is at stake is not simply the competence or incompetence of Kristi Noem. What is at stake is whether the United States still operates within a system of checks and balances that actually functions. And the answer, based on what was presented today, is troubling. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was unequivocal last week. If Trump does not fire Noem, Democrats will initiate impeachment proceedings. As of today, 162 of the 213 House Democrats have signed the impeachment resolution introduced by Representative Robin Kelly. This is not fringe political theater. This is 3/4 of the Democratic caucus taking a formal position. And even more telling is the fact that some of the signatories are well-known centrists, legislators who until recently resisted any impeachment language, viewing it as politically damaging. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania, known for supporting positions aligned with the Trump administration's immigration agenda, made a direct public appeal to the president. Fire Noem, Americans died. She is betraying the core mission of DHS. Fetterman voted to confirm Noem. He supported the border agenda, and he still reached the conclusion that she needs to go. When you lose supporters who voted to put you in office, the problem is no longer political. It is a matter of credibility. Senator Tillis saw in Noem a record with no point of pride. and he threatened to block nominations and bring the Senate to a standstill until he gets answers. This is a real fracture within the Republican Party. Not symbolic dissent, but concrete action with direct legislative consequences. The question of the 737 aircraft with luxury amenities purchased by DHS, raised by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, generated skepticism even among senators who tend to give the administration the benefit of the doubt. Noem argued the aircraft is necessary for long-range command and control operations, that it will replace aging equipment and save hundreds of millions of dollars. That may be true, but when you spend $220 million advertising yourself and then show up with a plane equipped with a bedroom and flat-screen televisions, the burden of proof falls entirely on you. What emerges from this hearing, taken as a whole, is the portrait of a department that grows in power while shrinking in accountability, that accumulates operational authority while rejecting legislative oversight. That enforces the law with an intensity producing documented consequences for American citizens, and then defines those consequences as acceptable side effects. And that is led by a secretary who spent months avoiding Congress and showed up today, finally, without convincing answers to any of the questions that actually matter. Impeachment is unlikely in the current legislative environment. Democrats do not hold a House majority. Conviction in the Senate requires 2/3 of the vote. That is not going to happen while the Republican Party remains unified. But what this hearing did was place on the public record, with names, dates, and documented individual cases, a set of serious institutional failures that can no longer be dismissed as opposition rhetoric. That is what the political process should do when it works. Force a confrontation with reality, regardless of the immediate outcome. The question this hearing leaves for all of us is not specifically about Kristi Noem. It is about what limits a constitutional democracy is willing to impose on the exercise of state power over its own citizens, and whether those limits exist only on paper or whether they still exist in practice. If you made it this far, it's because this subject matters to you the same way it matters to me. Serious politics demands serious attention. Hit like if you believe Congress needs to do its job of oversight, regardless of party. Subscribe so you don't miss any analysis. And tell me in the comments, do you think Kristi Noem should remain in office? Or was this hearing proof that she has lost the ability to lead DHS? I want to read your opinion.